Hey, hi guys, this is C. Arpita Tulsian here. I hope you all are doing good. So, here I am with the next revision, that is the company law revision for your November 2021 examinations. I hope you all have watched the economic laws revision which we had posted in the last week, and I hope that was useful for you. In this particular revision also, we are going to cover each and every topic, and while doing the revision, again I have used the 7th edition book which is applicable for the November 2021 examinations. If you have the book, well and good. If you don't have, and if you wish to purchase, then in that case you can just go to the website, and it's written here arpitatulsian.com, and you can just take it from there. And yes, so without wasting any time, I think you can start with your revision. Let me know if this was helpful for you. If economic laws revision was helpful for you, please do let me know. I love reading your comments. All the best. Let's start with the super quick revision of the first chapter of company law, that is companies incorporated outside India, ranging between section number 379 to section number 393. First one, the most important thing, that is the definition of the foreign company, which is given in 242. It means any company or a body corporate which is incorporated outside India, which has a place of business in India, either by itself or through its agent, either physically or by electronic mode, and it should be conducting some or the other business activity in India in any other manner. If all these three conditions are fulfilled, then in that case, such a company will be treated as a foreign company as per the Companies Act 2013. Carrying on business by way of electronic mode, examples of that can be B2B transactions, B2C transactions. It can be telecommunication, telemarketing, relating to education, relating to information, IT, relating to research. It can be anything, irrespective of the fact wherever the main servers of that particular company is installed, irrespective of that fact. And one more deeming section which is given in section number 3, one more deeming provision which is given in section number 386. That is, if a company has a share transfer office in India, or if a company has a share registration office in India, then even that will be deemed, to be having or that will be deemed, or that will be assumed as a place of business in India, or having a place of business in India, right? Now, for making a particular company as a foreign company, or treating a company as a foreign company, we have to make sure that the three provisions which were given in section 242 are getting fulfilled. The fact that the company has been floated, or the company has been incorporated, or the company has involvement from Indian citizens does not change the nature of the company. Even if the company has been incorporated by Indian citizens, then also the company will be treated. As a foreign company if it fulfills all the criteria of section 2 clause 42. Then going on to the main provisions now, section number 379. Section number 379 talks about the applicability. Now, suppose if there is a particular company which has fulfilled the requirements of 242, then it will be treated as a foreign company, and section number 380 to 386 and section number 392 and 393 will be applicable to such foreign companies. This is what they say primarily. Okay, now if there is any such foreign company where more than or equal to 50% of the paid up share capital, that is equity plus preference, is held by one or more Indian citizens, or it is held by one or more Indian companies, or it is held jointly by both, means majority of the share capital is held by such Indians, then in that case the company will still be treated as the foreign company only, just that for the purpose of applicability of the provisions, the company will be treated at par with an Indian company. And if it is treated at par with an Indian company, then all the provisions pertaining to an Indian company will be applicable to such foreign companies as well. Then going on to the next very important section, that is section number 380. Section number 380 talks about whenever a foreign company wants to come in India, it wants to establish a place of business in India and wants to do some business activity in India. After that, it has to get itself registered with the ROC. Okay, now what is the procedure for registering itself with the ROC? First of all, you have to submit list of 8 documents to the ROC. First one, certified copy of the charter document or the statute, just like your MOA, AOA. In English. If it is not in English, then the certified translated copy has to be submitted. Then we have to give the address of the principal office, that is outside India. we have to give the address of the registered office in India. Then we have to give the name of the authorized person, name and address of the authorized person who is authorized to receive the or who's authorized to transact the business in India, or authorized to receive the documents or notices in India. Will give his details. Then fifth point, we are going to give the details of all the directors and the secretaries. Their full personal details will be given. Their name, their address, their passport number, their PAN. Then if it's a secretary, then the secretary's membership number, their email ID, their date of birth, father's name, mother's name, spouse name, and nationality, email address, etc. Everything has to be provided there. Then after that, 5 points done out of 8. Then after that, we are going to give the information about the past dates if we had ever opened a place of business in India. When did we open it and when did we close it? That details has to be submitted. Then we have to give a declaration which will be given by all the directors that they are not convicted from incorporating a company either in India or abroad. That declaration will be signed by the directors and the authorized person. And last, if there is any other information as may be required by the ROC, then we'll have to give those details. Okay, this was the list of 8 points. So now we are going to use form number FC1. We'll use form number FC1, plus we'll pay the fees, plus we'll attach this eight list of documents along with the form, plus we will give the attested copy of approval that we have obtained from the RBI as per the FEMA Act 99, plus attested copy of approval from any other regulator if at all it is required, and if not required, then in that case we'll give a declaration that no such approval was required. All these things will go and submit it to the ROC having jurisdiction over New Delhi, irrespective of the fact that wherever the place of business of this particular foreign company is situated. And anyone who had started the procedure of registering a foreign company as per the old law will have to continue in the old law itself. They need not transit themselves into the new law. Okay, and whenever we once we go and submit this to the ROC in form number FC1, this has to be done within a period of 30 days from the date of establishment of place of business in India. Means after establishment also you can go, but within a period of 30 days you have to take everything and you have to go to the ROC. And if there is any change in the details that we have submitted to the ROC, then whenever such changes happen, then we are supposed to file form number FC2, which talks about the changes in the data which we had submitted to the ROC, and that has to be submitted within 30 days from the date of such change. Whenever that change happens, from that day within 30 days we'll go to the ROC. And last point, that is whenever the place of business in India is to be closed. Okay, whenever a place of business in India is to be closed, then in that case, we are just supposed to give a notice to the ROC that, sir, we are closing down our place of business in India. And from that day, all our obligations of submitting the returns or submitting the information or documents to the ROC gets over then and there itself. This was contained in section number 380. Now going on to section number 381, which was very, very simple, talking about the accounts and audit of the foreign companies. So every foreign company is required to prepare their financials, their books of accounts, their balance sheet and the P&L in the prescribed manner, containing the prescribed details, and such documents should be attached as may be prescribed. Okay, then in the later part of the section, they'll also say that they have to try to prepare their accounts to the extent possible, or they have to try to prepare their financials to the extent possible in the Schedule 3 format. That has to be done. These financials has to be prepared in English language. If not in English, converted into English. This will be prepared and this will be submitted to the ROC in every year or in every calendar year. Every year this is going to be done, and this has to be done within a period of 6 months from the close of the financial year, whatever is applicable to them. If there is any sufficient cause for delay, then in that case, ROC can provide you an extension of maximum 3 more months for submitting these financials to the ROC. While preparing the accounts, we have to make sure that section number 128 to 138 provisions are fulfilled. These accounts should be audited by an Indian CA. While doing that, the provisions of section number 139 to section number 148 will be applicable. Along with these financials, we have to also attach the consolidated financials of the entire entity, plus we have to attach the details about the related party transactions, plus about the repatriation of profits and repatriation of funds to their home country. All these details will be taken up together, and then these will be submitted to the ROC within 6 months plus 3 months if it is required at all. Okay. Then along with this financials, you are also going to attach a form called as form number FC3, in which you are going to include all the details of all the list of place of businesses that you have in India as on that particular balance sheet date. Along with the financials, you will attach it, and the form that is that is attached along with is form number FC3. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 382, which talks about display of name. Every foreign company, it has to display its name, its country of incorporation, and the fact that the company's liability is limited. Okay, that has to be displayed outside its place of business, and it has to be displayed in the letterheads, bills, documents, etc. When you're disclosing it or displaying it outside the place of business, then it has to be in English and plus one local language. But when you're putting it in the bills, letterheads, etc., then in that case, even if it is in English, that would be sufficient. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 383, which says 383 talks about service of notice or service of documents on the authorized person. So they are telling that if ROC wants to issue notices or if ROC wants to serve notices on this particular foreign company, then it will be deemed that it is properly done if it has been addressed. If it has been addressed to that particular authorized person and it has been sent to the address which was given to us at the time of registration, and that can be sent by, or that can be given by way of hand delivery, by way of post, or by way of electronic mode, that is by way of email. If it has been done by this way, then it will be deemed that the notice that has been served on the foreign company is totally validly served. Okay, it will be deemed as if it is validly served. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 384, which is a reference section. 384 simply says that we had already studied it initially in section number 379, that to a foreign company, section number 380 to 386 and 392 and 393 would be applicable. But it's not that only these sections are applicable to a foreign company. Section number 128 to 148 is also applicable to a foreign company. If a foreign company issues prospectus, then provisions relating to prospectus is also going to be applicable. Provisions relating to inspection, inquiry and investigation, which ranges from 206 to 229, even that will be applicable. Provisions relating to annual return given under section number 92 will also be applicable to them. CSR provisions will also be applicable to them. So it's not that it is restricted only to 380 to 386. Because of section number 384, the scope of sections becoming applicable to a foreign company has increased. Okay, one important thing and one new thing to be done in this particular section here is every foreign company is required to submit its annual return, which is going to be in the format called as FC4, and this annual return will be submitted to the ROC within 60 days from the year end, and it will contain the required particulars as on a balance sheet date. So annual return of a foreign company goes in form number FC4. Okay, next section, that is section number 385, which simply talks about payment of fees to the ROC. Just like it is applicable for every Indian company, even for a foreign company, whenever it is filing any documents, whenever it is filing any returns with the ROC, whatever is the prescribed fees, without saying, or without, it goes without saying, whatever is the prescribed fees by the ROC, that company is required to pay that. Next few sections are going to talk about the prospectus now, which is very, very simple. First of all, section number 387, which talks about dating of prospectus and the content which should be there in the prospectus. Okay, now these provisions will be applicable to every foreign company which is going to issue a prospectus in India. Okay, either it has been already incorporated outside India or it is going to be incorporated outside India. But if it plans to raise money from India, then the provisions of prospectus is going to be applicable. You cannot issue, distribute, circulate any prospectus in India unless it is dated and signed. That is very, very important. Okay, we will see who is going to sign the prospectus in section number 389, but signing of the prospectus is must. Now, matters which will be there in the prospectus. Now, we have got one section called as section number 26 in our Companies Act 2013, which talks about the matters to be contained in the prospectus. Those matters will be anyway there in the prospectus. Right. Along with that, there are 5 other things which are to be included in the prospectus, specifically from a foreign company point of view. What all things are there? First of all, the law under which the company is incorporated. Then after that, we have to give two addresses. One is the Indian address where the documents can be inspected, and another thing is the address of the principal office in India. Suppose if you have multiple offices in India, then the principal office address has to be given. Then after that, the date and the country of incorporation, the home country, the main country. And last one, you have to attach the charter document, that is the instrument defining the constitution of the company. All these things have to come along with the prospectus. These five things which is given here, this is specifically applicable in case of every foreign company, right? Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 388, which says that every prospectus, just like it was applicable for Indians also, for Indian companies also, even for foreign company, the prospectus should compulsorily consist of experts' consent or experts' opinion, and that should not be withdrawn. Okay, so first of all, if the expert has not given his consent, you cannot issue prospectus. If the expert has given his consent but before registration he withdrew his consent, you cannot distribute the prospectus, you cannot issue or circulate the prospectus. And the prospectus should compulsorily contain a statement that it has expert consent and that has not been withdrawn. Then it will be treated as valid, and then only you can issue, circulate, distribute that particular prospectus. Then after that, going on to section number 389, they say that before you come up with this prospectus in the open market, or before you come up with this prospectus in before the public, make sure that the prospectus, first of all, it should be dated and signed. Next thing, it should be registered with the ROC. It should be written on the face of the prospectus that this has been delivered to the ROC, so that public get a satisfaction that yes, at least it has been registered with the ROC. Now, along with this prospectus, when you're going and getting it registered with the ROC, you have to make sure that you submit some extra things to the ROC. 5 extra things are to be submitted to the ROC. Okay, what are those? First one is a repeated thing, that is expert's consent should be there. Next thing, the copy of contract or arrangement with the MD or manager that you have entered, that is with your managerial personnel. Then after that, any material contract entered during the last 2 years which is not in ordinary course of business. Then the copy of underwriting agreement and the copy of power of attorney if the prospectus couldn't be signed by the directors. These 5 things extra along with the prospectus will go and submit it to the ROC for the purpose of registration. Okay, and this prospectus should be signed compulsorily by chairperson of the company and by 2 directors of the company. Chairperson has to mandatorily sign. If the directors are not able to sign, by chance if the directors are not able to sign, then in that case they can issue a power of attorney in favor of any other person who can sign the prospectus. This was covered in section number 389. Now going on to the next section, that is section number 390. 390 talks about IDRs. Now every foreign company, maybe as per section number 242, or any foreign company incorporated outside India or to be incorporated outside India which does not fall under 242. If anyone wants to raise funds from India by way of IDRs, then 3 things are very, very important for it. It has to comply with all the CG rules. Okay, it has to comply with the SEBI ICDR regulations, and it will also have to comply with the RBI directions if at all given by the RBI. These are the 3 things. These are the 3 things that is going to be applicable in case of IDRs. And then they have just explained you the concept of IDR, where the foreign company wishes to raise funds from India. So with the help of a domestic depository, they issue IDRs in India, which is denominated in Indian currency, and ultimately the capital flows from the Indian investors to the foreign company through the domestic depository. Then after that, the next section, that is section number 391. 391 talks about 2 subsections. First subsection simply says that any foreign company which is issuing any prospectus, or any particular foreign company which is going to issue its IDRs, in that case they will still be liable, like if at all there is any misstatement in the prospectus, or if say for example they are fraudulently trying to induce people to invest the funds in the company, fraudulently trying to induce, then in that case they will be liable under section 34 to 36. 34 talks about criminal liability, 35 talks about civil liability in case of misstatement of the prospectus, and 36 talks about punishment for fraudulently inducing persons to invest in the company. So this section will be also applicable on the foreign company. This is what they are trying to say. right? And then section number 391 subsection 2, where they say that, say for example, if there's a foreign company which has raised some funds from India and now it has done some default in redeeming those securities or either redeeming or for repayment of those securities, then in that case Indian Companies Act has the power to do the winding up of the Indian operations of such foreign company as per chapter number 20 of the Companies Act. This power has been given to the Indian government, or this power has been given to the Indian laws by way of section number 391 subsection 2. So that was section number 391. Now going on to section number 392, which is super duper important. 392 simply says that if you have contravened the provisions of this particular entire chapter, anywhere if you have contravened the provisions, then in that case you will be liable for punishment. The foreign company will be liable for fine, which is going to range between 1 lakh to 3 lakhs. In case of continuing offense, it can go up to 50,000 rupees per day. And in case of persons in charge, we will be liable for fine, which is going to range between 25,000 rupees to 5 lakh rupees. Earlier we used to have imprisonment here. Now the imprisonment provisions have been totally removed and amended. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 393. Suppose if there is any particular foreign company which has contravened the provisions of this particular chapter, then what will be the effect on such foreign company? So all the agreements, all the contracts which has been entered into by the foreign company will still be deemed to be valid. Okay, we can sue them. They cannot institute any legal proceedings against us, and they cannot claim any set off in debts. They cannot claim any set off in the debts at the time of payment to any particular party in India. Then the last section, that is section number 393A for the chapter, which says that central government can anytime exempt any foreign company or would-be foreign company from any provisions of this particular chapter, from any sections that we have studied in this particular chapter, if it thinks that it is necessary to do so. And that can be done by way of passing a notification in the official gazette and by placing that notification before both the houses of the parliament. And wherever, as per rule number 12, wherever the central government is of the opinion, or wherever the ROC is of the opinion, or the act is of the authorities under the act are of the opinion that we are fraudulently dealing or trading in the name of a foreign company. Okay, we are not a foreign company, but we are fraudulently dealing or trading in the name of foreign company, then it can do the investigation under section 210. It can do the investigation under section 210 of the Companies Act 2013. This was all about the provisions of companies incorporated outside India. I hope you were able to recollect. The super quick revision of NCLT and NCLAT chapter. Very simple, very small chapter. Now, NCLT, NCLAT and Supreme Court, these are all your appellate authorities under the Companies Act 2013, as well as the same people are going to act as your appeal authorities for the purpose of IBC 2016. Now, how is this NCLT and NCLAT constituted? In NCLT, the head person is called as the president, and we are going to have some judicial members and some technical members within it. When we go to the NCLAT, there we are going to have a chairperson, and we are going to have some number of judicial members and technical members who are going to form part of this NCLAT. This is going to be the constitution. Okay, and always remember the head, that is the president or the chairperson, these people are going to be ultimately the judicial members only. Means they will be having the knowledge pertaining to law. Now, this is the way in which NCLT and NCLAT is constituted, but for the purpose of working, for the purpose of listening to the appeals, etc., we constitute benches. Okay, benches are constituted under section 419. Central government is the prime authority or is the main authority who constitute benches, such number of benches as may be required, as may be prescribed for the purpose of conducting the appeals under this law, that is Companies Act 2013, plus for the purpose of conducting the appeals under the IBC 2016. Okay, so required number of benches can be formed. Then the principal bench, the main bench, as usual, it is going to be at New Delhi, and the main bench of the NCLT will be presided by the president, and the main bench of the NCLAT will be handled over by the chairperson, and the principal bench is going to be sitting at New Delhi. Now, for the purpose of exercising the cases, or for the purpose of exercising the proceedings, we are going to function in form of benches. Every bench by default consists of one judicial member and one technical members, which is appointed from your tribunal. Okay, there are two provisos here. One can be, suppose if the case, if it is a very small case, if it is a very petty case, or it is such a matter which can be handled by a single member also, then we can even form a single member bench, and this single member has to be a judicial member mandatorily. Okay, on the other hand, there can be such cases where the matters cannot be handled by a single member. If the matters cannot be handled by a single member or by two members also, then more than two members can also be appointed in the bench. Now, if there are two members, or if there are even number of members in the bench, then in that case, we can have difference of opinion between the members itself. If there is any difference of opinion between the members itself, then the president will either involve himself, or the president will involve any third member or any other member in the tribunal. Then the matter will be heard again, and then we are going to take a revised majority on that. This is how the cases functions under NCLT and the NCLAT. Going on to the next section, that is section number 420. Whenever the matter goes to the NCLT, after that the NCLT conducts inquiry, it gives ROBH, it listens to all the parties who are there in the appeal, and then it passes the order. If there is any mistake which is there in the NCLT's order, then that can be rectified by the NCLT when it is brought to the notice by the parties, and that has to be rectified within a period of 2 years. But if you have already preferred an appeal before NCLAT, then you cannot come back to the NCLT for its rectification. Okay, so either go for rectification or go for appeal. Try to understand whether it is a mistake or whether you are aggrieved by the decision. And then after that, whatever is the order which is passed by the NCLT, that will be sent to all the parties who were sitting in the appeal. Now, if we are aggrieved by the order of the NCLT, then we have got an option that we can go and file an appeal before the NCLAT. But if the order was passed with the consent of all the parties, then in that case, you cannot go and file an appeal before the NCLAT. Okay, if it was done with the consent of both the parties, you cannot appeal before the NCLAT. Otherwise, yes, you can. Otherwise, you can go and file an appeal before NCLAT. Whenever you are going before the NCLAT, you can go within 45 days from the date of receipt of the NCLT's order. If there is any sufficient cause that we could not go within 45 days, then in that case, NCLAT can condone that particular delay for a maximum or by a maximum period of 45 days. After that, the NCLAT can pass different types of orders. It can confirm, it can modify, it can set aside, and it will pass the final order after giving us the reasonable opportunity of being heard, and then the order is circulated. The order is circulated, or the order is sent to all the parties who were sitting in the appeal. Then after that, the next section, that is section number 422. In both the cases, either in the case of NCLT or in the case of NCLAT, they have to try to dispose of the appeal as expeditiously as possible. But they have given a statutory mandatory time limit here that the matter should be disposed of within a period of 3 months from the date of from the date of filing the appeal. If it could not be completed within this period of 3 months, then in that case, the benches people would record the reasons for this particular delay, and then in case of NCLT, the president, or in case of NCLAT, that is the chairperson, if they think fit that yes, there is it is proper that they could not complete the case within a period of 3 months, so they can extend the time period by a maximum period of 90 days. Then after that, if we are aggrieved by the order of NCLAT also, last resort, we can go to the Supreme Court. We can go and file an appeal to the Supreme Court only on question of law. You can go within 60 plus 60 days, and the decision of Supreme Court will be full and final. And we are no one to tell to the Supreme Court that please dispose of the case within so and so time. So till here, all your major important provisions are covered. Now let's do the simple provisions which are coming up here. NCLT, right from section number 424, NCLT and NCLAT have got all the powers as contained in a civil court. So they are regulated by the code of civil procedure. They are regulated by the code of civil procedure, but they are not bound by it. Means they can be regulated by their own procedure as well. They have got all the powers of civil code except one power, that is search and seizure powers is not available with the NCLT and the NCLAT. And all the proceedings which are going on before the NCLT and NCLAT will be deemed to be judicial proceedings, because it is just like your court itself. If there is any mistake which is done by NCLT or NCLAT, if there is any contempt which is done by them, or there is any disobey, then in that case High Court can come into picture and it can punish the NCLT or the NCLAT. NCLT or NCLAT, for the purpose of getting the work done, they can delegate powers to its employees, officers, or any other person for getting the work done. And all these people who are sitting in the tribunal, that is the president, chairperson, judicial member, technical member, these people will be deemed to be public servants. These people are deemed to be public servants as per the Indian Penal Code. Right? If they do any mistake, these people who are there in the authority, if these people do any mistake and if they say that such damage was done in good faith, then in that case we cannot institute any suit or legal proceedings against such persons. Whenever these people want to take the custody of books of accounts, custody of any properties, custody of any documents, maybe under IBC or maybe under the Companies Act, then in that case they can take the help of some people who are sitting in the court. Means they can take the help of Chief Metropolitan Magistrate, or they can take the help of Chief Judicial Magistrate, or they can take the help of District Collector for taking the possession from the company. Then, since the powers have been assigned to respective authorities in the entire Companies Act, civil court, no local court can interfere in between. It does not have any jurisdiction. Okay, it does not have any powers to interfere in between. It cannot provide any stay. It cannot provide any injunction. Nothing can be done, because already authorities have been assigned under the law. Then, if there is any vacancy in the tribunal, if there is any vacancy in the place of any particular members, then too the decision which is taken by the other members will still be valid. Okay, if there is any vacancy in the tribunal, if there is any vacancy in the selection committee for the technical members, then also the decision which is taken by other members will still be valid. Means vacancy is not going to invalidate the proceedings. Okay, there can be vacancy because of removal, there can be vacancy because of resignation. That does not mean the tribunal stops working. Okay, the decision can still be taken by the rest of the members. Then after that, suppose if you do not know how do we go and represent before the NCLT or the NCLAT. If you know, then you can go. But if you do not know how to represent, then you can appoint a legal representative. That can be a CA, that can be a CS, that can be a cost accountant, that can be a legal practitioner, or it can be any other person who knows how to represent the case before the NCLT or NCLAT. Wherever in the entire law, the time limits are not given. Okay, in that case, we'll go and take the time limits from the provisions of the Limitations Act, as we have done it in economic laws as well. And the last one, that is section number 434, this simply talks about the transitional provisions with effect from 1st June 2016, that whichever matters were pending before the Company Law Board as on 1st June 2016 will get transferred to the NCLT year. The matters which were reserved for the High Court will still be continued by the High Court only. The matters against which we had already filed the appeal before the High Court before 1st June 2016, those will continue with the High Court only. So conclusion, only the matters which were pending before the CLB, on which CLB had not passed an order, as on 1st June 2016, only those matters will get transferred to the NCLT. And from 1st April 2017, voluntary liquidation proceedings were notified under IBC. Before that, Companies Act 1956 was applicable. So if you had started the procedure of voluntary liquidation under the Companies Act 1956, please complete it under Companies Act 1956 itself. You need not jump to the IBC from 1st April 2017. This was all about your NCLT and the NCLAT chapter. I hope you are very, very clear till here. Chalo, let's start with a super quick revision of this chapter, compounding of offences, adjudication and special court, which is going to range from section number 435 to 446B, and then 454 and 454A. These are the sections that we are going to cover in this particular chapter. First of all, types of offenses. There are going to be two types of offenses. One is compoundable offenses and the other one is non-compoundable offenses. Compoundable offenses are those offenses where the person who has filed the complaint, that person agrees to have the charges dropped against me, is willing to let the charges drop against me. There, the types of compoundable offenses are fine only, imprisonment or fine, or imprisonment or fine, or both. Then there are going to be the next type of offenses which talks about the non-compoundable offenses, where imprisonment is going to be mandatory, where no relief can be provided to me on the face. That is imprisonment only, and the other one is going to be imprisonment and fine. These are the two types of offenses which we have. After that, going on to the next main section, that is section number 435, which talks about establishment of special court for the purpose of determination of offences, or for the purpose of speedy trial of offences. Central government establishes the special court. Special court is established for all the type of offences except for one offence that you have to remember, that is except for section number 452. For that purpose, central government establishes as many special court as required for the purpose of specific jurisdiction. Special court is going to have judges within that. Where there is a case where imprisonment is of 2 years or more, at that time the cases will be handled either by a session judge or by an additional session judge. In case of other cases, the cases will be handled by the metropolitan magistrate or judicial magistrate of first class, and these people will be appointed by the central government in concurrence with the Chief Justice of High Court for the respective jurisdictions. This is how the special courts are established. Okay, now going on to section number 436, which talks about doing the trial, means how the trial is done by the special court. So first of all, whatever offences were written in the previous section, that is section number 435, that is all the offences under the Companies Act 2013 except for 452. All these will be tried by the jurisdictional special court. Jurisdictional special court means that particular special court wherever the registered office of the company is situated. If suppose in that particular area we have got more than one special court, then to which special court the case is going to go, that will be determined by, or that will be specified by the High Court of that particular jurisdiction. Then after that, whenever any particular person, we have a doubt on a particular person, or when we suspect a particular person that he has done so and so offense, then first of all that person is forwarded to the magistrate. Okay, which magistrate? That person can be forwarded either to the judicial magistrate or to the executive magistrate. When he goes to the judicial magistrate, magistrate can keep the accused person with him for a maximum period of 15 days, and executive magistrate can keep him for a maximum period of 7 days, maybe for the purpose of questioning and to gather information about him. And once his work is done, that can be maximum within 15 days or maximum within 7 days. Once everything is done, then after that, that person is forwarded to the jurisdictional special court. Special court is going to have all the powers. Special court is dealing with the criminal offences, etc. also. So it is going to have all the powers as vested in the Code of Criminal Procedure. And then when this person is thrown before the special court on the basis of the police report which would have been filed by the magistrate, on that basis special court will take the cognizance of the offence, and now it is going to start the trial of the offence. Now there are two types of trial. One is summary trial and the other one is regular trial. If suppose originally there is an offence for which imprisonment does not exceed a period of 3 years, then in that case we can start trial of such cases. We can start the trial of such cases in a summary manner, and it will be called as a summary trial only if the final imprisonment, the final punishment that you have given in such cases does not exceed a period of 1 year. So original imprisonment should not exceed 3 years, and the final imprisonment should not exceed a period of 1 year. If this is fulfilled, then we can say that yes, the case was completed in a summary manner. If this condition does not get fulfilled, then we automatically fall under the regular trial. Then after that, just like earlier, High Court used to exercise its powers on session courts. Similarly, High Court is going to exercise its powers and jurisdiction even on the special courts now. Okay, that is given in section number 437. Going on to the next section, that is section number 438. Whenever we talk about these proceedings which are going on before the special court, which code is going to be applicable, that we have already studied. That is code of criminal procedure is going to apply whenever any trial is going on before the special court. The person who does this trial, or the person who judges, or the place where it is done is called as, that special court is going to be deemed as court of session, or the court of metropolitan magistrate, or the court of judicial magistrate of first class. So special court is deemed as this, and the person who is conducting the prosecution before the special court, that person is called as a public prosecutor. He has got all the rights, powers, privileges, etc., which is vested in a public prosecutor. Going on to the next section, that is section number 439, which is important. Now they say that all the offences under the Companies Act 2013, all the offences are non-cognizable and bailable. Non-cognizable means arrest cannot happen without an arrest warrant, and that person can also be released on bail. Okay, except for one offence, that is Serious Fraud Investigation Office, the offence which is determined by the SFIO under section 212, that we are going to study in the inspection, inquiry and the investigation chapter. Except for that, all will be non-cognizable and bailable. Everything will be non-cognizable and bailable. Now they say that whenever you want to give cognizance of the offence, against, whenever any offence has been committed by a company, whenever any offence has been committed by any person in charge, etc., then in that case, cognizance, the court or the magistrate will take the cognizance only when there is a written complaint which is given by any of the four persons, either by the ROC, or by the shareholder or the member, or by the company, or by any person authorized by the central government. If these people go and give the cognizance, then only that offence will be the trial of that particular offence will be started. And when we talk about offences done in respect of securities, that is, if there is any offence done in respect of issue or transfer of securities, or where the company has declared the dividend but not paid it, then in that case the courts or the magistrate can also take the cognizance when it is when the cognizance has been given by a person who has been specifically authorized by the SEBI. This person is an extra person who can give the cognizance. Now, whenever ROC is giving the cognizance, or whenever CG authorized person is giving the cognizance, then in that case, their physical appearance before the court is not mandatory until unless the court specifically asks them to be present in the court. Means they can send any authorized person on their behalf. And the entire section is not applicable when the company wants to proceed against its officers. Okay, if company wants to proceed against its officer, then this section is not going to be applicable. However, if the company wants to proceed against the liquidator, then it can proceed, because liquidators are not the officers of the company. And suppose if we want to, suppose if in case of a government company, if we want to file any complaint against the government company, etc., then in that case cognizance can be given. Cognizance can be given by, it can be given by your CG authorized person. It can be, in case of securities, it can be given by SEBI authorized person. The words ROC, members and shareholders have been totally omitted from that four list. From the four persons list, the word ROC and members and shareholders is totally omitted. Those are not allowed to give cognizance in case of a government company. This was all about your section number 439, that is offences under the Companies Act. Just remember this much: offences under the Companies Act except for 212 will be non-cognizable and bailable. Non-cognizable means arrest cannot happen without an arrest warrant, and bailable means that person can be released on bail or bond. Going on to the next section, that is section number 440, which says that till the time the special courts are established, till that time the session court or the judicial magistrate or the metropolitan magistrate will continue in that particular area. There is no problem in that. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 442, which talks about mediation and conciliation. Whenever there is any dispute between the company and between the authorities. Who are the authorities here? Central government, ROC, NCLT, NCLAT. Then in that case, instead of going for the appeal, we can even plan to go for mediation or conciliation. Now this mediation, and for this we are not supposed to go under the Arbitration and the Conciliation Act. The provisions have been provided under the Companies Act itself. So central government is going to maintain a panel of experts, that is mediators and conciliators, and that panel is going to be called as mediation and conciliation panel, which is going to have respective number of mediators and conciliators who are ready to take up the cases, so that there is a speedy resolution, or so that there is a speedy solution that is that the company or the person in charge of the company is going to get. So either the authorities will tell us that please go to the mediation and the conciliation panel, or we can even suo moto go and make an application to the authorities. Sir, you will take a hell lot of time. So instead of that, please send the case to the mediation and conciliation panel. Once the matter is referred to the mediation and conciliation panel, they will take a time period of 3 months to determine the case. They will give their recommendation to the authorities, and then the authorities will simply do the work of approving that particular decision. This way we are saving on some time in respect of the authorities. Otherwise they were required to do the entire procedure thing, but now they are not required to do the entire thing. They are just supposed to approve the decision of the mediation and conciliation panel. Okay, then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 443, which talks about CG appointing company prosecutors. Now whatever the offences trial thing was happening, that was happening before the special court, and the person who conducts the prosecution before the special court, that person is treated as what? That person is treated as a public prosecutor. Okay, the person who has got the knowledge of company law matters, that person is deemed as the company prosecutor. I mean, public prosecutor is there. By qualification, this person is a public prosecutor only. But since he has got the experience and the knowledge in the fields of company law matters, this person will be treated as company prosecutor. So CG can designate or CG can notify such numbers of company prosecutors or such number of prosecutors who can act as company prosecutors whenever the case goes before the special courts. And they have got all the same powers. They have got all the same powers as vested in a public prosecutor. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 444. Section number 444, appeal against acquittal. Okay, for this, just try to understand the term called as acquittal. Acquittal means a clear verdict or a clean verdict. Suppose if the court has passed an acquittal order for me, means the court is telling that I am not guilty, I am a clean person. The court has passed such kind of judgment. Now suppose if there is any court except for the High Court, okay, if there is any court except for the High Court which has passed an acquittal order for the company or for the person in charge for the company, then in that case, the revenue, who is the other party, the ROC or the central government, whoever is the other party, can I say they will be aggrieved because the court has treated me as a clean person. So now they can appoint company prosecutor to file an appeal against this acquittal order. They will now proceed to file appeal against this clean order. So CG can do so. CG can appoint company prosecutors who will be filing an appeal against my order now, but the appeal cannot be filed against the order which has been passed by the High Court. So if acquittal order has been passed by the High Court, then CG cannot appoint company prosecutors for that. But if the acquittal order has been passed by any other authorities, then CG has got the powers that it can appoint company prosecutor to proceed against me in form of an appeal. Then going on to the next section, that is section 445, which is very, very simple. Any person who was wrongly accused, or who was, without reasonable cause, if any particular person was accused and now the special court has passed an acquittal order in that particular person's case, then in that case, the person who is now released, that person will be liable, that person will be eligible for certain amount of compensation. Maybe he can say that I incurred a lot of cost during this particular proceedings, or there was a loss of goodwill, I lost my market share in the market, and for whatever reasons he states, he will be eligible for compensation. But what is the amount of compensation, within how much time will it be paid, etc., that will be determined under section 250 of the Code of Criminal Procedures 1973. That is not determined under the Companies Act. Companies Act simply says that yes, you can pay as per that particular law. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 446, they say that whatever fines are collected by the court, okay, whatever fines are collected by the court, either by the session court, special court, or whatever, that fine is going to that is going to be used for meeting the expenses of the proceedings. That is one thing. And another thing is the person the whistleblower person who gave the information about this particular offense, on the person who said that so and so offense is being happening, if that comes out to be true, then in that case we are going to reward that particular person out of the fines that we have collected. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 446A. 446A talks about the factors that we are going to use, or that we are going to take the help of while determining the level of punishment. Okay, while determining the level of punishment or penalties under section 454. Like less amount of penalty or punishment should be imposed, or high amount in case of range. So that depends on size of the company, that depends on nature of this particular company, that depends on how much loss has been caused to the public interest, how much gain have we made out of this by doing the contravention, and the repetitive nature of default. On this basis, we are going to determine whether penalty should be levied on the lower side, or penalty should be levied, or penalty or punishment both, should it be levied on the lower side or should it be levied on the higher side. Then after that, going on to the next two sections, that is next section, that is section number 446B. 446B talks about lesser penalties, only monetary penalties in case of contravention, in case of certain companies. Okay, in case of certain companies, that is 4 types of companies: for OPC, small company, then startup private company, and for producer companies. If these people do any kind of contravention under the provisions of this particular act, for which a penalty has been provided in the law, then in that case, just because these people are small, their penalty will be reduced to half. Okay, straight away their penalty will be reduced to half, and that too subjected to a cap limit of maximum 2 lakhs in case of a company, and maximum rupees 1 lakh in case of person in charge. This is the amount of penalty that is going to be levied in case of these 4 small persons. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 454, which is very simple, which talks about adjudication of penalties. Whenever any contravention happens under the act, then the penalty is applicable. This penalty is determined by the adjudicating officers. Adjudicating officers are nothing but the CG officers, not below the rank of certain registrars under the central government. And for every jurisdiction, we are going to have respective number of adjudicating authorities. Okay, adjudicating authority comes into picture. He gives us, there is a particular procedure to be followed as per rule number 3. After that, he is ready with his order. He imposes the penalty, plus he tells us to rectify the default. Okay, he'll tell us to pay the penalty also, plus he'll tell us to rectify the default also. Okay, exception for the purpose of section number 92 and section number 137 for these: annual return and filing of FS with the ROC. For this, if suppose we rectify the default within 30 days of issue of notice, then in that case they can relieve us from imposing the penalty. That is, we can be relieved from the imposition of penalty. AO gives the ROBS to the parties concerned there, and then only it is going to impose the penalty. If we are aggrieved by the order which is passed by the AO, then we have a right to go and file an appeal before the regional director within 60 days from the date when we receive the AO's order, and will pay the required fees for the appeal, whatever is applicable, and then the final order is going to be passed by the regional director. It can confirm, it can modify, it can set aside, etc. These orders can be passed by the RD, and this is going to be full and final. Suppose if we do not listen to the AO's order, or suppose if we do not listen to the RD's order, then in that case that turns out into or that results into an offense. Okay, that results into an offense. Then after that, there are certain procedures that we have to follow, that the AO has to follow while imposing the penalty. Whenever the AO imposes the penalty, he has to give us a show cause notice. Okay, show cause notice can be of any period ranging between 15 days to 30 days. Within this much time, we'll have to reply. Okay, Whenever we receive the AO's notice, from that day, within a period of 15 to 30 days, whatever is written in the notice, we'll have to reply back. In this notice, this is going to be a show cause notice. So it is going to be written that give us the reasons why penalty should not be imposed on you for so and so default. Okay, it has to be a speaking notice here. Full detailed notice is going to be there. Then after that, we are supposed to reply to that particular notice in electronic format in whatever was the time period. Within that much time, we'll have to reply. And suppose if there are any sufficient reasons, then I can be granted an extension of a maximum period of 15 days. If AO is of the opinion, after receiving the reply, if AO is of the opinion that I should be physically called, means I should be called in the office and then some questioning etc. has to be done, then AO will issue me a notice within 10 days of my reply that okay, I have received your reply, but we need to meet on so and so date for the purpose of discussing on this particular matter. Either you can come or you can send your authorized representative, or you both can come to represent the case before me. And finally, after that, after this electronic reply and plus after the physical appearance, if required, AO is going to pass the final order. If physical appearance was not required, then whatever was my last day to reply to the show cause notice, from that day within 30 days, AO has to pass the order. And if physical appearance was required, then whenever I received AO's notice for the imposition of penalty, when I received the show cause notice from the AO, from that day within a period of 90 days, the AO will have to pass the final order. Okay, once the final order thing is done, then in that case, whatever is the order which is passed by the AO, that has to be dated, that will be signed, plus it should contain the reasons that why physical appearance was required. Copy of orders will be sent to everyone. It will be sent to the parties, it will be sent to the central government, and it will be put on the website of the MCA. Okay, AO has got these powers that it can call any particular person, it can summon any person, it can ask for evidences from some person, and on that basis, it is going to take the decision of imposition of penalties. If suppose the penalty is going to be in a range, then in that case, AO can use those factors given under section 446A to determine what quantum of penalty can be levied, and whatever are the penalties that are collected, okay, through the MCA portal, that gets credited to the Consolidated Fund of India. Then after that, going on to section number 454A, which talks about penalty for repeated default. Suppose if there is a company or any officer or any person in charge, etc., if they have done any particular default, or if they have done any kind of contravention under the law first time, then a particular amount of penalty was imposed on them. If suppose they do it again, if suppose they do the same thing again within a period of 3 years, then second time they'll be liable, like second time or subsequent times done within these 3 years, they will be liable for a penalty of 2x. Like whatever is the new amount determined for this penalty, that into twice the amount will be levied on them. This is the punishment given for subsequent defaults, or this is a punishment given for repetitive defaults. This is how the chapter goes. I hope you are very, very clear till here. Okay, so let's start with the super quick revision of prevention of oppression and mismanagement, which is going to range between section number 241 to section number 246 of the Companies Act 2013. First of all, two very important terms in the chapter. First one is oppression and the second one is mismanagement. Whenever the affairs of the company are being conducted in such a manner which is prejudicial to the interest of the members, then that particular act will be treated as oppression. And suppose if the affairs of the company are being conducted in a manner which is prejudicial to public interest, or which is prejudicial to the interest of the company, or whenever some big material change has taken place in the management of the company, and because of which there is a possibility that the affairs of the company can be conducted in a prejudicial manner, then in that case that can be treated as mismanagement. Oppression and mismanagement is going to go hand in hand. We are going to use both the terms together in the chapter henceforth. Now, if suppose the shareholders feel, if suppose the members or the shareholders, if they feel that there is oppression or mismanagement happening in the company, then in that case, they have got the right, okay, they have got the right to go and make an application to the tribunal. They have a right to apply to the tribunal, which comes up in section number 241, okay, which comes up in section number 241. So, either the members or the central government can go and make an application to the tribunal under section 241. In subsection 1, the members have the right, the required number of members as given in section 244 have a right to go and make an application against oppression or mismanagement as defined above. They can go and make an application to the tribunal. Okay, alternatively, as per subsection 2, even the central government has the right to go and make an application to the tribunal, and it will tell the tribunal to pass the necessary orders if it is of the opinion that any of the four circumstances exist. First one, if there is any particular person in the company who was there in the management of the company or in the conduct, who was engaged in the conduct of the affairs of the company, if they are found guilty of fraud, misfeasance, persistent negligence, etc., then we can go and make an application. The CG can go and make an application to the tribunal. Or if the company's business is not being carried on as per the sound business principles or prudent commercial practices, or if the company is being carried on or the affairs of the company is being carried on in such a manner which can cause serious injury to the trade or the industry to whom we belong. And the last one, the business has been carried on to defraud the creditors or the members, or which is prejudicial to the public interest. If any of these circumstances exist, then the central government can go and make an application. Central government can go and make an application to the tribunal to pass the necessary orders. Okay. Now, in such cases, what does the central government do? Central government, if suppose central government is able to identify that so and so person is responsible for this act, then the central government will initiate a case against that particular person. It will give the case in the hands of the tribunal and will tell the tribunal to record a decision or to take a decision that whether this particular person is eligible to hold the office in the company's management or not, and then this becomes a proper case. The person against whom we have filed the case, that person becomes a respondent, means he becomes one of the party to that particular case, right? And whenever the central government goes and makes an application to the tribunal, that has to be properly dated, signed as per the code of civil procedure, and it should contain all the facts that why, as per the central government, it feels that there is oppression and mismanagement happening in the company against the members of the company. Okay, so conclusion of 241 is either the members will go and make an application to the tribunal, or the central government, if any of those four circumstances exist, then it can go and make an application to the tribunal. Okay, now they had given certain specific pointers there. Suppose if, first of all, the member should be aggrieved. The person who is going and making an application under section 241, that person should be aggrieved in capacity of a member only and not in any other capacity. Example, if he is a director in the company, then if he is aggrieved in the capacity of director, then 241 is not applicable to him. This was even decided in the case of Rao versus Rajeshwari Ramakrishnan. Then after that, similarly, suppose if the company is not declaring the dividend, it is simply accumulating the profits, it is not declaring the dividend, that does not amount to oppression. This was decided in Thomas Wettam case law. Then after that, similarly, if the company is suffering losses, if the company is continuously suffering losses, merely if we just put an allegation that the company is suffering losses, it cannot be called as oppression. This was decided in the case of Ashok Beetlenet Company Private Limited. Similarly, suppose if the company has issued new shares in the public, and because of which the holding or the percentage holding of the existing shareholders has reduced. Just because new shares have come up in the market, because of that my shareholding or the old shareholding has reduced, that does not lead to oppression in the company. The company has full right to issue new shares to the public, right? Similarly, the number of people who can go and make an application, or the members who have got a right to apply under section 241, that is not only available to majority shareholders or minority shareholders or something like that. No, we cannot confine it to majority or minority. The number of members who can go and make an application, that is specifically provided for in section number 244. So we cannot say that this right is available only to majority ones or this right is available only to minority ones. No, how many of them can go and apply? That particular number is given under section 244. Okay. Then after that, in section number 241, we had a right to apply. We went and we made an application to the tribunal. So now the ball is in the court of the tribunal. Now the tribunal will check the application. It will see whether actually the affairs are being conducted in a prejudicial manner. And if the tribunal is of the opinion, that yes, there is oppression and mismanagement in the company, but it is not proper to wind up the company. It is not proper. It would be unfair to wind up the company for such thing. So the tribunal will try to resolve us. Okay, the tribunal can pass certain necessary orders. The tribunal has those powers. Ma'am, what kind of orders can the tribunal pass? So tribunal can tell us how the business is to be conducted in the near future. Then it can, do the reduction in the share capital. It can tell us to do the buyback of shares. It can tell us to change the shareholding pattern. It can put restriction. It can put certain restriction on transfer of securities. It can terminate certain people from the company. It can modify the agreements. It can modify the agreements which is entered between the company and its managerial personnel. It can set aside any property transactions which were done during the last 3 months. It can remove any managerial personnel. It can, if any managerial personnel has earned some gains, some wrongful gains from the company by doing some default, we can recover those gains from the managerial personnel. We can tell the company to report to the tribunal from time to time, or we can appoint some person who can keep an eye on that particular company to who can ultimately report it to the tribunal. And if required, if we need to punish the company for the wrongful things that it has done, then some penalty or fine can be imposed on that particular company by the tribunal. By doing this, tribunal is hopeful. By doing this, the tribunal is hopeful that yes, we will be able to revive the company, we will be able to resolve the company. Okay, so tribunal is going to pass such orders. Whatever is the order passed by the tribunal, that we'll have to go and submit it to the ROC, just like we always do. We'll go and submit it to the ROC within a period of 30 days. And if suppose because of the order of tribunal, if we need to do certain changes in the MOA AOA, then we'll have to do those changes. And then the altered copy of the MOA AOA also should be submitted to the ROC within a period of 30 days from this particular change. Okay, and then remember, CG had filed a case against that particular person under section 241 that whether this person should be continuing in the company or not, whether that respondent should be continuing in the company or not. So tribunal will take a decision for that particular person also, that whether he should be continuing in the company or no. If you do not comply with the tribunal's order, example, they had told you to change your MOA, AOA, you did not change it, or you are acting against the tribunal's order. If you are basically not complying with the tribunal's order now, then in that case, that will be treated as an offense. On the company, there will be a fine ranging between 1 lakh to 25 lakhs. On the defaulting officer in charge, the fine that will be applicable will range between rupees 25,000 to 1 lakh. Okay, so these powers were exercised by the tribunal under section 242. Now going on to section number 243, where suppose if the employment agreements are altered, or if suppose any particular person is terminated, or his terms of employment are modified, then in that case he won't be eligible. Okay, such people won't be eligible for any compensation for loss of office. Whatever are his due amounts, that he can take, but any extra compensation will not arise. Okay, any claim for compensation is not going to arise. That is one thing. Suppose if members made an application to the tribunal and the tribunal passed an order under section 242, then in that case, the MD, manager or the director, whoever were removed, they cannot act in this particular company in these same positions for a period of 5 years. If they want to come in the company before a period of 5 years, no problem, take the approval of the tribunal and then you can come. Okay, and then when the CG told the tribunal that please decide whether this person is a fit person or not, whether that respondent is a fit person or not. If that person is removed, then there is a big restriction on him that he cannot act in any company's management. He cannot act in any company's management for a period of 5 years. If you want to again come before a period of 5 years, then in that case you can take the approval of the tribunal. Okay, and just remember one thing, 243, section number 243 is going to override the entire company law. Okay, 243 simply says that no compensation will be paid, even though it is written in the MOA, AOA, even though it is written in any particular law, even though it is written in any particular contract that we will pay you compensation. But no, if 243 becomes applicable, then only 243 will be applicable. Basically, 243 is going to override everything. If you are held default, if your agreement has been set aside, then you won't be eligible for any compensation for loss of office. Acha, still if any person knowingly acts directly or indirectly in the management of the company during those number of years when there was a restriction on that particular person, then he will be liable for a fine up to rupees 5 lakhs. Now that means he has done a offense now. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 244, which pertains to section number 241. In 241, we were going and making an application to the tribunal. Right, we were going and making an application to the tribunal for oppression or mismanagement. So how many of them should go and make an application? Okay, in case of members, in here there was only members. So in case of members, in cases where the company has share capital, so at least not less than 100 members or not less than 10% of the total number of members or 1/10 of the total number of members, whichever is lower, or member or members holding at least 1/10 of the issued share capital. Okay, not paid up share capital. This is issued share capital of the company, and yes, these shares must be fully paid. When the company is not having share capital, then it was very, very simple. At least 1/5 of the total number of members should go and make an application for the purpose of section number 244. Joint holders of shares will be counted as a single person. If some person wishes to withdraw their consent after the petition has been filed, then we just have to check the status on the date of filing the petition. Later, even if some people withdraw their consent, like if 100 was required but 5 of them has withdrawn after the petition has been filed, that is going to have no effect at all. Okay, this was even decided in the case of Rajamundry Electric Corporation case. Then after that, the next one is when the members are going and making an application, it's not necessary that everyone should go to the office of the tribunal to make this application. One of them, after taking the consent from everyone, or an authorized representative on behalf of all these people, can go and make an application to the tribunal. That is allowed. And last and the most important point here is, suppose if you are not able to meet the requirement of section number 244, that is the minimum number of members, but you are able to satisfy to the tribunal that, sir, actually oppression and mismanagement is there, then the tribunal can waive off these conditions and it can accept your application. Right? This was given in section number 244. Now going on to the last section, that is section number 245, which talks about the class action. So class action is such a thing which option is available, where the option is available to the members and the members or the depositors if they feel that something prejudicial has happened against the interest of the company or against their own interest, and they are aware about the cause. So they go and make an application to the tribunal to pass the necessary orders. Okay, they will be very specific about it. They will go to the tribunal to pass the necessary orders. Okay, which type of orders can be passed? 3 type of orders we can request the tribunal to pass. First one, to restrain the company from doing any ultra virus act, from going against the MOA, from going against the provisions of this act or any other law, or to restrain the company and its directors to act on any void resolution, or from taking any action contrary to the resolution which has been passed by the members. We are trying to stop the company from doing all these wrongful activities, or you are requesting the tribunal to pass an order to declare a particular resolution as void, or to claim the damages, or to claim certain damages or compensation because of whom we might have suffered some amount of losses. So we can claim damages or compensation from the company, its directors, from the auditors of the company, or from the consultants, expert advisors of the company on whose advice maybe we relied, on whose report maybe we relied, and we suffered some amount of losses. So in this case, in section number 245, we are going to the tribunal. Okay, some number of members and depositors will be going to the tribunal and requesting the tribunal to pass any of these orders. Okay, now how many of them should go and make an application to the tribunal? That is another thing. First, let's do it for the members. Okay, for members, again, 2 bifurcation: company having share capital, company not having share capital. If the company is not having share capital, then it is same as before, that is 1/5 of the total number of members. If the company is having share capital, then again at least 100 members or 5% of the total number of members, whichever is lower, or members holding at least 5% of the issued share capital if it is an unlisted company, and 2% of the issued share capital if it is a listed company. So this way, these many number of members have to go and make an application to the tribunal. And when we go to the depositors, then in that case, 100 depositors or 5% of the total number of depositors, whichever is lower, or depositor or depositors to whom the company owes at least 5% of the total deposits. These many of them can go and make an application to the tribunal under section 245. Once they go and make an application, tribunal is going to check whether the application was done in good faith, if it involves any personal interest or no, and it will try to check whether all the evidence, it will first gather all the evidences and it will check whether all the evidences are correct or no. If all this is okay, then after that the tribunal is going to give a public notice on all the members and the depositors that so and so case under section 245 will be initiated now. Similar applications will be consolidated into one. Same cause of application will be rejected if we have multiple ones, and whatever are the costs for doing the section 245 will be ultimately recovered from the company or the person who is ultimately held liable. We are going to recover it from that particular person. Right? Then the tribunal is going to pass the necessary orders. The order which has been passed by the tribunal, that will be binding on everyone. If we do not comply with that particular order, then that will lead to an offense and we will be punishable with fine. Company will be punishable with fine which ranges between rupees 5 lakh to 25 lakhs. Person in charge will be liable for a punishment where fine will be there ranging between 25,000 to 1 lakh, and imprisonment up to 3 years will be applicable on that particular person. This is going to be applicable if we do not comply with the orders of the tribunal which was passed under section 245. If someone is going and filing frivolous application or vexatious just for fun, then in that case, first of all, the application is going to be rejected, and after that we can even impose cost on that particular person up to rupees 1 lakh for doing this frivolous activity. The entire section number 245 is not applicable for banking company because they say that if something like this happens, then you can go under the Banking Regulation Act or as per the provisions of the RBI laws and not as per the Companies Act. And again, here when you are going and making an application, then in that case, like the required number of members or depositors are going and making an application, then in that case, one of them on behalf of them or an authorized representative on behalf of so many people can go and make an application, and that's absolutely fine with the tribunal. This was all about the important provisions of your section number 241 to section number 245, and 246, the last section, that has to be referred after doing winding up chapter. So these were your most important provisions out of prevention of oppression and mismanagement. Just two different case laws here. One is the case law about majority rule. So it is an established fact that in a particular company, always the majority shareholders or the people who are holding majority of the shares, they rule the company. This was decided in Foss versus Harbottle rule case law. And the last one, that is where the shareholders are denied, inspection of books of accounts. So there's no mistake of the company if they are denying the shareholders to inspect their books of accounts, because shareholders do not have a right to inspect the books of accounts, they have the right to inspect the registers. So if they are denying me to inspect the books of accounts, then I cannot say that this is an oppression. So this is not an oppression. If this is not an oppression, then this particular chapter is not applicable. This was decided in the case law called as Lalita Rajya Lakshmi versus Indian Motor Company. And this was all about your prevention of oppression and mismanagement, and I hope this is very, very clear. Okay, let's start with the super quick revision of inspection, inquiry and the investigation chapter, ranging between section number 206 to section number 229. First of all, there are going to be two sections, section number 206 and 207, which is going to discuss about, or which is going to talk about inspection and inquiry, the powers of which have been given to the ROC primarily. Starting with section number 206. In section number 206, ROC has got the power to call for information, to inspect the books of accounts and to conduct the inquiries from the companies and its person in charge. For that purpose, ROC can do this particular inspection and inquiry on the basis of information available with it, or on the basis of scrutiny of the documents which we would have submitted with the ROC. On this basis, ROC can either call us to furnish certain information, or ROC can call certain books of accounts from us and conduct the inspection. For this purpose, ROC need not give us. For this purpose, ROC need not give us the ROBH. It can simply issue a notice on us to furnish the information, documents, explanation on certain matters. Then after that, once the ROC issues this first notice to us, it is the duty of our company, it is the duty of our officers, including the past officers of the company, to furnish the necessary information, to the ROC to the best of their knowledge. Whatever information is available with them, to the best of their knowledge, they have to furnish this information to the ROC. Okay, suppose if once the ROC issued the first notice, after that, if the ROC is of the opinion that we did not submit the information, or the information submitted by us was inadequate, or if suppose the ROC wants to know more about the affairs, it wants to gather more information about our affairs because it thinks that unsatisfactory state of affairs exist in our company, then in that case, ROC even has the powers to issue additional notice on us. ROC even has the power to issue additional notice on us, but here, before issuing the additional notice, it has to make sure that it records the reasons in writing with itself, that what was the need, that why did it issue the second notice to us. Then after that, ROC has also got the powers. ROC has also got the powers to do questioning to that particular persons in the company. Meaning, ROC has also got the powers to conduct inquiries into the affairs of the company by questioning some people. This can be conducted on three bases. First one, suppose if investors' grievances are not addressed at all, or say for example, if ROC has some information in its possession, that inquiry should be conducted, or if some person has gone and made a representation to the ROC that the business in this particular company is being conducted in a fraudulent manner or is being conducted for a fraudulent purpose. Then in that case, ROC will first inform these people, the company or the person in charge, that so and so complaint has been received against you. Maybe someone has made a representation against you, or some investor has made a complaint that investors' grievances are not addressed. Then in that case, ROC will inform about the grounds to the company or the person in charge, and only after that, it can conduct the inquiries. And if some people are held guilty, like if we come to know that yes, these people are guilty of some particular things, then this will be treated as a fraud and they will be punishable under section 447. Till here, whatever we were doing was, powers was available with the ROC. Now, even the CG can interfere in between, even the central government can interfere in between, and it can direct the ROC, or it can appoint any inspector for conducting the inspection and inquiry in case of any particular company, or the central government can even pass any general order, or it can pass any special order on the statutory authority, and it can authorize the statutory authority, example SEBI, RBI, etc., to conduct the inspection of books of accounts of a particular company or some class of companies. If suppose we are not listening to the orders which have been passed by the ROC, by the inspector, or we are not furnishing the information which they have asked for, then we will be liable for some amount of punishment. This was given in section number 206. Going on to the next section, that is section number 207. In section number 207, it is going to be a repetition and it is going to be a continuation of section number 206. That suppose if any documents, any information, any papers, etc. were called under section 206, the last section, then it becomes the duty of a company, of the employees of the company, of the officers of the company to produce such information, to furnish them with all the statements, explanation, etc., and to provide them with all the necessary assistance, to cooperate with them and to provide the necessary assistance. And these officers or the ROC inspector, the ROC or the inspectors, they have got all the powers as vested in civil court. So they can, call for evidences, they can examine us on oath, they can summon us, they can tell us to discover and produce all the books of accounts, documents, etc. All these things, all these powers are vested with the ROC or the inspector who was conducting the inquiry and inspection under section 206. Right, and whenever they are doing inspection, they have got the right that they can put the identification marks on the books, and while returning the books, they can with themselves, since they are going to return the original books, they can keep the copies of the books of accounts with themselves. This was told in section number 207 till here. In section number 206 and 207, your inspection and inquiry gets over in all respects. Now going on to the next section, that is section number 208, which talks about report on inspection. Once the inspection and inquiry was conducted under section 206, after that the ROC or the inspector, whoever was there, that person will have to make a report about their inspection and inquiry, and they'll have to submit it to the central government. And that report may include a recommendation that whether further investigation, detailed investigation into certain matters is required or not. This is not mandatory. This recommendation is not mandatory. It may include in its report. Okay, this report we went and submitted to the central government, and suppose if as of now practically the powers of central government have been delegated to the regional directors. So the report is practically gets submitted to the regional director. Anyway, in the law it's still written as the report will be submitted to the central government, just like it's written here in the first point. Okay, after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 209, very important section, which talks about search and seizure. If the ROC or the inspector, while doing their inspection and inquiry, if they are of the opinion or if they have reasons to believe that the books of accounts of the company are likely to be destroyed, altered, mutilated, falsified, secreted, destroyed, etc., then in that case, we would not like to leave the books of accounts in the company. So, ROC or the inspector has the power to enter and search the places wherever the books of the company has been kept, but this it can do only after obtaining an order from the special court. And after that, once it has obtained the order from the special court, after that it can seize such books, papers, documents, etc. When we are seizing the original books, we can allow the company to keep the copies or the extracts of such books of accounts. We can keep it with us. The ROC or the inspector are keeping it with themselves for a period of 180 plus 180 days maximum. And now when we return it after that 180 plus 180 if any, then at that time we can put the identification marks on it, and now we can keep the copies or the extracts of the books of accounts, right? Then going on to the next section, that is section number 210. From here starts your investigation. Okay, from here starts your investigation. So now in section number 210, we are going to study the basis. On what basis further investigation can be conducted into the affairs of the company, and this is being ordered. This is going to be ordered by the central government. So there are 4 bases on which the central government can order for investigation. First one, on the basis of report submitted under section 208, or if the company, if the shareholders pass a special resolution that sir please conduct investigation, or if the central government thinks that it is in public interest to carry on that investigation, or if any order has been passed by any court or tribunal, then it becomes, in the 4th point, it becomes mandatory for the central government to conduct the investigation. And for physically doing the investigation, for actually doing the investigation, the central government is going to appoint inspector. Either it can be a single inspector or there can be multiple inspectors who can be appointed for the purpose of investigation, and they are going to report to the central government. Right. In the second case, where the shareholders were passing a special resolution and they were requesting the central government to conduct the investigation, in that case, central government may ask these people to pay a security deposit up to rupees 25,000, about which we are going to study in a further section. Okay, so now once this is done, after that, going on to the next 2 similar, next 2 group of sections, that is section number 211 and section number 212. Okay, section number 211 talks about, and 11 and 12 talks about your SFIO, that is Serious Fraud Investigation Office. In section number 211, we are going to establish, we are going to constitute this SFIO, and the investigation is going to happen in section number 212. In section number 211, SFIO is first of all constituted by the central government only. It is going to do investigation into the serious frauds of the company. SFIO is going to be headed, okay, it is going to be headed by a person called as director. This director is not below the rank of joint secretary to the government of India and having knowledge in the field of corporate affairs. Okay, and then within that we are going to have people we are going to have experts from different fields like banking, taxation, accounts, finance, IT, capital markets, law, etc. We are going to have different experts, and the respective cases will be handled by respective experts as required by that particular case. So this way the SFIO is constituted. Okay, now after that, within this SFIO, you have first had the directors, within that you had the experts, and within that also you're going to have some number of officers and employees who are actually going to do the groundwork. So their appointment, their terms and conditions, their salary and allowances, their service conditions, etc. will be as may be prescribed. We do not have those provisions for us. Then after that, let's conduct the investigation. Now, investigation will be conducted by the SFIO. So, if once the central government is of the opinion that yes, investigation is necessary and that too there exists a serious fraud in the company. If there exists a serious fraud in the company on 4 bases, okay, on 4 bases, central government can delegate this matter. Central government can delegate this matter to the SFIO. First one, again on the basis of report under section 208, or if SR has been passed by the company, or if the central government is of the opinion that it should be done in public interest, or if it receives a request from the central government or the state government department to conduct this investigation because they are of the opinion that serious fraud exists in the company. Then in that case, central government will assign this task to the SFIO, and then the required, like to SFIO means it is going to give it to the director, and then the director is going to prepare its team that who all experts will be proper to conduct this particular investigation. Now, first of all, once the case comes to the SFIO, SFIO says that I will work solely or I will work exclusively, means if any investigation is going on, then that shall pause, or if any investigation, any other investigation was going to be started against this particular company or was going to start against this particular company, then that shall not start at the moment till the time the SFIO is working in the company. Okay, after that the SFIO is going to conduct its investigation. It is going to submit the report to the central government within whatever is the time period specified. That the people who are working under the SFIO, they are just deemed as inspectors. Okay, they are experts, but ultimately they are deemed as inspectors. So they have got all the powers of inspectors that we will study in section number 217. And whenever the SFIO comes for the purpose of investigation, again it becomes the duty. Of the company, of the officers of the company, including the past officers of the company, to provide them with all the necessary information as asked for. Okay, now here, since we are held guilty of this particular serious fraud under section 212, then in that case we become guilty under section 447 of the act, that is fraud. And all these offences shall be cognizable and non-bailable, just like your PMLA. Okay, just like your PMLA. So here that person cannot be released on bail, and that person can be arrested without even an arrest warrant. Okay, now that person cannot be released on bail, that is the by default rule, but there are certain exceptions in that. First point was same as that of your PMLA, that is the public prosecutor should be given an opportunity to oppose the release, and if he opposes, but still the special court is of the opinion that this person will not commit any new offense while on bail. This is one circumstance. If the special court is satisfied, then that person can be released on bail. Or if there is any woman, or if there is any person who is under the age of 16 years, or if there is any person who is sick or infirm, then if the special court directs, then even these people can be released on bail. Okay, now here, since it is a case of fraud, the code of criminal procedure becomes applicable. So the matter is going to go to the special court, but special court will have to go and give the cognizance to the special court. So who can give the cognizance to the special court? The main head who was working under this particular section, that is the director of the SFIO, or any person authorized by the central government. That person has got the right that please go and give the cognizance to the special court, so that now the punishment etc. can be announced by the special court. Okay, then similarly in this director of SFIO, we have got different types of directors. We have got different levels of directors. So the director not below the rank of assistant director of SFIO, that person has the powers that he can go and arrest any particular person. We anyway do not require an arrest warrant. We just have to inform that person about the grounds, that why are we arresting you. We will just inform that person about the grounds, and we can simply go and arrest him. Once I go and arrest any particular person, after that I will inform it to the SFIO that sir I have arrested, or the director of the SFIO that sir I have arrested so and so person. Okay, once that person is arrested, after that, that person is presented before the special court within 24 hours, excluding the travel time, before the special court or before the judicial magistrate or before the metropolitan magistrate. We present that person there. Suppose if the investigation is going on for a long period, then in that case, SFIO may also be required to submit an interim report to the central government if required. Otherwise, once the investigation is completed, we are going to submit a final report anyway. Okay, now if you want to go and obtain this copy of the report, you cannot obtain it from the central government. We'll have to go and make an application to the court, that is to a special court, and only from there we can obtain the copy of this particular investigation report. Okay, once the report is once the central government and once the court receives the report, after that we are going to start the prosecution against the employees, officers, or any person who was involved in that particular serious fraud. And if there is any person, if there is any director, officer, employee of the company who has earned some undue profits or undue gains from the company, then in that case we will take the help of the NCLT for the purpose of disgorgement. That is, we will recover the undue gains that they have done from the company, right? And there's one responsibility of the SFIO, that whenever the SFIO is working, it can seek help from the other authorities, any central government department, state government department, or any other law, or from police authority, etc. We can take help from them. And plus, once the investigation is completed, now we have a whole lot of information available with us. So even we are responsible for sharing this information with the other authorities. Sharing of information, disclosure of information, just like we had studied it in our PMLA chapter. And one extra point here coming up here is, suppose if the arrest is done in case of a government company, or if arrest is done in case of a foreign company, then arrest can be done only after taking a written approval from the central government. That is one thing. And suppose if the arrest pertains to government company, then in that case we are supposed to inform the MD or the person in charge of the government company that so and so person has been arrested from your company. And suppose if the MD or person in charge itself is arrested in case of that government company, then we will go and intimate it to one of the ministries called as administrative ministry. To his secretary, we will go and inform that we have arrested the MD or person in charge of so and so government company. That was one extra requirement there. So this was all about your section number 212. This was all about your section number 212. That is where the investigation was conducted by the SFIO. Then going on to section number 213, where the investigation is going to be ordered by the tribunal. Okay, now there are four bases again. Okay, there are four bases where the investigation can be ordered by the tribunal. First one, if the business is being conducted to defraud the creditors, members, or the business is being conducted for unlawful purpose or fraudulent purpose, etc. Or if the company itself was formed for a fraudulent purpose right from beginning. Or if the promoters have been found guilty of fraud, misconduct, misfeasance, etc. And last, if the members are not given all the information which they should have been given. If any of these bases exist, then in that case, either the tribunal can suo motu order for investigation, or any person can go and make an application to the tribunal for conducting the investigation under section 213. This any person includes members, it can include creditors, it can include any particular person. So now, once if these four bases are established, then after that, the tribunal is going to give a ROBH. Tribunal will conduct the investigation. It will pass the order, and it will give an ROBH, and then it will proceed for the prosecution if any particular person is held guilty. Now, how many members should go and make an application? In case of, the numbers have been given only in case of members. If the company is not having share capital, then same as our oppression and mismanagement, that is 1/5 of the total number of members. 1/5 of the total number of members can go and make an application. If the company is having share capital, then in that case, 100 members or member or members holding at least 10% of the total voting power, these many of them can go and make an application to the tribunal for the purpose of making an application under section 213. And if any person, if suppose we come to know that yes, the business was conducted in a fraudulent manner, or if the company was formed for a fraudulent purpose, or if the promoters etc. are guilty of this, that is, if you fall under the first three bases. Okay, if you fall under the first three bases, then in that case, it will be treated as a fraud and you will be liable under section 447. This was all about your section number 213. Let's go to the next section, that is section number 214. In section number 214, they are telling that there are two places. Okay, one was in section number 210 where the application, where the SR was passed by the shareholders, and they requested the central government to conduct an investigation, which we had studied in section 210, or if the order has been passed by the tribunal, under section 213. In these two cases, the central government, even before appointing an inspector for that particular purpose of investigation, it will tell the applicant to pay a security deposit of up to rupees 25,000. If suppose this investigation results into prosecution, means if it is a good case, means if it turns out to be the claim of the shareholders etc. turn out to be correct, then in that case they will get the refund of the security deposit that they would have paid. Okay, now this up to rupees 25,000, this ranges on the basis of the turnover of the company. Suppose we'll go and check the turnover for the last year. If the turnover for the last year was up to rupees 50 crore, then in that case the amount will be 10,000. If it was more than rupees 50 crore but up to rupees 200 crore, then it is going to be 15,000. And if it is more than rupees 200 crore, then the security deposit is going to be up of rupees 25,000. Okay, so this amount will have to pay as security deposit. Suppose if it results into prosecution, we'll get this money back. If it does not result in prosecution, then gone, that will be forfeited. Then after that, going on to the next section, that is section number 215, which was a very simple section, which simply said that body, corporate, firm, associations, etc. cannot be the inspector. So inspector ideally should be an individual person, the person who is going and doing the groundwork, who is going and doing that inspection, inquiry, investigation, etc. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 216, investigation into ownership of the company. This can be ordered. This can be ordered by the central government, or this can be even ordered by the tribunal. That's written at the end. By default, generally it is ordered by the central government. If central government is of the opinion that we need to find out the true persons who are owning the company, then in that case, we can do investigation into ownership of the company to find out three things. First of all, the persons who are financially interested in the success or failure of the company. Then the persons who materially influence the policies of the company or who control the policies of the company. And the last one, we were checking the beneficial owner of the shares of the company, or the people who are having beneficial interest in the shares of the company. So to check about these three things, we can do the investigation. That investigation happens under section 216. Okay, so this can be ordered either by the central government, or the tribunal can also direct the central government to conduct the investigation into ownership of the company. And at that time, everything, the scope, etc. will be decided, and that can even be limited by the central government. This was all about your section number 216. Going on to the next section, that is section number 217, which is a one-time read section. 217 simply talks about the powers of the inspector. Now, whichever type of inspector is appointed, maybe for the purpose of inspection, inquiry, or for the purpose of investigation, or for the purpose of SFIO, or in any of the sections, if there is any inspector that is appointed, if he comes in the company, then it becomes our duty. Okay, it becomes the duty of the company, it becomes the duty of the officers of the company, past officers of the company, employees of the company, agents of the company, etc., to provide the necessary information. To, for first duty is to preserve the documents, then to produce those documents before the inspector, and then to provide all the necessary assistance. That is our duty, we have to do it. Okay, now once they are coming in our particular company for the purpose of inspection, inquiry, investigation, then they can ask for the necessary information. While doing my investigation, they can even go to any other company, my related companies, and they can conduct their investigation, etc. also. But before doing that, the inspector has to take the prior approval. The inspector has to take the prior approval of the central government. And suppose if SFIO was going on in my case, and now it wants to switch on and do the investigation of the other company, then we'll have to, the inspector will have to take the prior approval of the director of the SFIO before it gets into the books of accounts of the related companies of my company. Then these people, these inspectors have got all the powers as vested in a civil court. So discovery of documents, examination of any person on oath, taking evidences on oath, etc. These powers are available with the inspector. And if you do not obey, a general punishment has been given. If you do not listen to the directions which have been given by the inspector, then in that case it will be treated as an offense and we will be punishable. Okay, then whatever, after doing the inspection and inquiry, the inspector has the powers that it can take down the examination notes. It will read it out before me. I will have to sign it that yes, he asked me this and I gave so and so answers. And these examination notes can be used as evidence against me in the court of law. If again I do not listen to certain things which have been instructed by the inspector, then in that case again that will be treated as an offense and I will be liable for some amount of fine. Now, suppose if the inspector is of the opinion that so and so information is not available in India, then in that case we can use the same concept of PMLA, that is sending a letter of request to the other country. Suppose if we are of the opinion that the information is not available here in India, but the information will be available outside India, then through the central government, we can issue a letter of request to the other country and we can seek the information from them. And similarly, vice versa thing can also happen. Suppose if they send us a letter of request, then it becomes our duty to furnish them with the required information within the specified time. These were the powers of the inspector under section 217. Going on to the next section, that is section number 218, which talks about protection of employees during investigation. Now, it can so happen that during investigation, the company would remove its employees, or it can dismiss its employee, or it can punish them, or it can reduce their terms of employment to their disadvantage. Then in that case, they are telling that the law says that the company cannot remove its employees directly. The company will have to first make an application to the tribunal seeking their objections, that whether do you have any objections if we remove so and so employee, and the tribunal is supposed to reply within a period of 30 days. If suppose the tribunal says that okay, it replies within 30 days and it says okay, remove so and so employee, then that particular employee can be removed. Suppose if the tribunal says no, you cannot remove, then in that case by default the company cannot remove that employee. Suppose if the tribunal does not reply at all within a period of 30 days, or if it replies late, then that is treated as no reply. If that is treated as no reply, then in that case the company wins. The company wins means the employee can be removed in that case. In the first two cases where the tribunal's reply was received, either yes or no, whoever is the aggrieved person can go and file an appeal before the NCLAT within a period of 30 days from the receipt of the NCLT's order, and the final decision, the decision of the NCLAT is going to be full and final. No appeal in that case is possible. Beyond that is possible. Okay, no appeal beyond that is possible. And in the last case where the tribunal could not reply at all, or where the tribunal did not reply at all, then in that case there is no appeal possible and the company wins in that particular case. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 219. 219 was talking about investigation into the related companies or other persons. In this, we are going and doing the investigation in 4 persons. First of all, we can go to the subsidiary of this company, to the holding company of this company, or to another subsidiary of our holding company, either present or past subsidiaries or holding company. Next, we are going to such a company where we have got a common MD or manager, means any person who is or was a MD or manager in our company is controlling another company as MD or manager. So we can go and do the investigation into such other company also. Next one, we are going and doing the investigation of such a company whose board of directors is required to act as per the directions given by the directors of our company. And the last one, we are going and doing the investigation of the company's MD, manager, employee, be it past person or be it the present person. We can do all these 4 things. Okay, we can do all these 4 things, but only after taking the approval of the central government. Because whenever we want to jump to any other company, from our company, if we want to go and do the investigation of some other company, then always the prior approval of the central government will be required. Otherwise, the inspector cannot act in that behalf. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 220, which talks about the search and seizure. Okay, now here the search and seizure that is happening, that is being conducted by the inspector during investigation. Okay, in 209, the search and seizure that happened, that was during inspection and inquiry. So here, if the inspector is of the opinion that while doing the investigation, if it comes to know that if we leave the original books of accounts in the company, then that can be altered, falsified, destroyed, mutilated, and all those secreted, etc., then in that case, inspector has the power that it can enter such places, it can search the place where the books of accounts have been kept, and then it can seize the books of accounts after allowing the company to keep the copies of the same. These have to be returned back to the company maximum till the end of the investigation. Means here there is no that 180 plus 180 time period is not available. And once we are returning it back, then in that case we can put the identification mark on it, and we can now keep the copies of the books of accounts or extracts of the books of accounts. So till here the investigation part of the chapter gets over. Going on to the next section, section number 221. 221 talks about freezing of assets in case of a company. Now suppose if the tribunal is of the opinion, that we can sell off our assets to defraud the creditors, members, etc., then the tribunal has the power that it can pass a freezing order on us for any particular period, but not exceeding a period of 3 years, if it is of the opinion that it is necessary to do so in the interest of the company, in the interest of the shareholders, in the interest of the creditors, then it can definitely do so. Tribunal generally does this when an order has been passed in the 5 circumstances, or tribunal passes an order in the 5 circumstances. Suppose if central government has told the tribunal to do so, or suppose if tribunal itself conducted certain investigation under section 213, it ordered investigation under section 213, and then it is of the opinion that we should pass the freezing order, or if someone has come and filed a complaint for that oppression and mismanagement under section 244, or if the application has been made by a creditor whose outstanding amount is more than or equal to rupees 1 lakh, or if complaint has been filed by any other person. Means basically, if central government has told, or if tribunal has told, or if some members or creditors have come and made an application, basically that way. So the tribunal can pass a freezing order under section 221, and if we contravene this freezing order, then we will be liable for certain amounts of punishment. Then similarly, going on to the next section, that is section number 222, where the tribunal imposes a restriction upon our securities. Okay, if the tribunal is of the opinion, if suppose tribunal is of the opinion that it needs to find out, okay, you remember we did the investigation under section 216 about the ownership of the company. So after doing that investigation, suppose if we are of the opinion that we need to find out more about the shareholding pattern, about the shares in the company, about the securities in the company, then, and if the tribunal is of the opinion that we cannot find out more information until and unless we put the restriction on the securities, so in that case the tribunal can impose the restriction on the securities for any period, but not exceeding a period of 3 years. Okay, this generally the tribunal does whenever the investigation was done under section 216, or if suppose someone goes and makes a complaint to the tribunal that, sir, you should be checking the securities of the company, then in that case tribunal will exercise its powers under section 222. What all powers does the tribunal have here? It can tell us that if you were going to issue new shares, then just stop for the moment. You cannot transfer any shares. If you transfer any shares, then that will be treated as void. You cannot exercise any voting rights in respect of the shares. No dividend or any capital repayment should happen except in case of liquidation. No new shares is to be issued. No buyback, etc. should be done. No reduction in share capital, etc. can be done. These restrictions can be put up by the tribunal, but for a maximum period of 3 years. And if we still contravene the orders of the tribunal, okay, if we still contravene the orders of the tribunal, then in that case, again, that will lead to an offense and we will be liable for certain punishment. Okay, then after that, going on to the last few sections, that is the miscellaneous provisions, starting with section number 223, which talks about inspector's report. Now, in whichever section the inspector was appointed, the inspector might be required to submit the interim report to the central government if required, and if not required, then once the inspection, inquiry, investigation gets completed, then in that case, the inspector is going to submit the final report. This report has to be in writing. If the members, creditors, or any affected person, if they want the copy of the report, then we can go and make an application to the central government and we can obtain the copy of the report. But the section is inapplicable to SFIO because we already know that in case of SFIO, if we require the copy of the report, then we'll have to go and make an application to the special court and then only we can take the copy. Okay, this report, the report of the inspector has to be properly authenticated with the seal of the company. If suppose seal is not possible, then in that case it has to be certified by the public officer, just like we discussed about the gazetted officer. And this report, the inspector's report, can be used as evidence against us in any particular court of law, in any legal proceedings. That was told in section number 223 about the inspector's report. Now, once the inspector's report goes to the central government or to the special court in that case, now we start taking action. Okay, now we start taking action against the defaulting persons. Basically, 5 actions can be taken. First of all, prosecution will be instituted. Means now punishment will be imposed on that particular person. That is one thing. Second thing is, 2 options are possible. Either you solve it as if it is a case of oppression and mismanagement, means you provide the relief from oppression and mismanagement, or if nothing works, then in that case we are going to do the winding up of that particular company. Okay, next one is we are going to recover the damages and compensation from the person because of whom we suffered this losses. Maybe the shareholders, creditors, or other people would have suffered some amount of damages and compensation. So we will recover it from the defaulting person. Then after that, the costs. The cost of the investigation, which was initially borne by the central government or by form of that security deposit, that now that will be recovered from the persons who have been held guilty. And the last one, if suppose if any officers of the company have involved themselves into earning any undue advantage or undue gains, undue profits, then now we are going to take the help of tribunal and we are going to do the disgorgement of such gains. These are the 5 actions that we are taking on the basis of the inspector's report, because now the case has totally got over. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 225, about which we have already discussed, that whenever the investigation expenses were borne by way of that security deposit under section 214, that was initial thing. Now suppose if that investigation had led into prosecution, then now we are going to get it reimbursed. Now we are going to get it reimbursed from the people who are held guilty, who are, who are prosecuted, who are liable to pay the damages. We are going to get it recovered from those people. This was there in section number 225. Now going on to section number 226, where they say that suppose if investigation proceedings are going on against a particular company and some shareholders, maybe they come and, or the company, they come and make an application for voluntary winding up, or if they file a petition for winding up before the tribunal, voluntary winding up under IBC or normal winding up under the Companies Act, or if some group of shareholders come and make an application for oppression and mismanagement, then even though they want to run away from this investigation proceeding, then to voluntary winding up, oppression, mismanagement, these processes cannot stop. These processes cannot stop the investigation proceedings. Means the winding up order is going to be effective only on the basis of the conclusion of the investigation. So the company cannot run away. The company cannot run away from the investigation proceedings, meaning that investigation proceedings are going to override the liquidation proceedings. Then after that, going to the next section, that is section number 227, which talks about obligations of the legal advisors and the bankers to share information with the authorities. So the Companies Act says that legal advisors are not bound to provide any information to the ROC, inspector, central government, or any particular authority except the name and address of their client. And when we go to the bankers, if suppose these authorities go to the bankers to seek some information about the person on whom investigation is going on, then in that case the bankers also can provide the information only about this particular person and not about any other person or not about any other body corporates. That is the restriction that has been put on the legal advisors and the banking companies by the Companies Act, section number 227. Then going on to the next section, that is section number 228, which was talking about inspection, inquiry and investigation in case of foreign companies. So whatever we have studied in the entire chapter, right from 209 to section number 229, each and every provision becomes applicable to the extent possible, obviously, to the extent possible, each and every section becomes applicable to the foreign companies also. And last, section number 229, which says that whenever the inspector, ROC, central government, etc., whenever they called for any information from you, and if you submitted false information knowingly, if you submitted false statements, or if you provided some information which you knew that this is wrong, then in that case, that will be treated as a fraud. And if that is treated as a fraud, then we will be liable under section 447 of the Act. And this was all about the provisions of inspection, inquiry, and investigation. I hope you are very, very clear with that.